Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first session in the afternoon on productive uses of energy, rethinking perspectives, and drivers for innovation. My name is Nolwazi Khumalo. I'm pleased to inform you that this morning, IRENA and GOGLA have signed a partnership agreement to advance the widespread adoption and the use of renewable energy with the ultimate goal of safeguarding a sustainable future. This partnership would advance collaboration on knowledge sharing and capacity building with a focus on energy access of grid solutions. The partners will also advance awareness and advocacy strategies to promote solar solutions for powering the agriculture and health sectors. In parallel to this session, there's a session in the Kameha Universal, and the session on the partnership with GOGLA. Moving along, this section will discuss the meaningful of productive uses of energy or electricity, and will showcase ongoing innovative, productive energy uses solutions and market potential. It will also highlight cross-sectional work such as the decentralized energy, renewable energy, and agricultural nexus, and the increased need for innovation. The session aims to reimagine the narrative of productive use of energy to be integrated across sectors and development goals agenda rather than a singular or isolated technological solutions. The audience is encouraged as you're starting the session to use the Slido code to pose any questions. With that, I will now invite Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General of IRENA. Gauri is the Deputy Director General of IRENA of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Ms. Singh will bring more than 30 years of experience in policy, advocacy, and project implementation within the field of renewable energy and sustainable development from India and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I know it's a post-lunch session, but I can tell you that it's going to be very interesting, especially for those who have been looking at access to energy and to be looking at new ways of how work can get done, and we can go beyond just looking at just, two bulbs kind of electrification to getting much deeper into this. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this very important session. And as you might have seen in the last 1.5 days, that at IRENA, we don't think of innovation just in terms of technology, but have a much more of a systemic thinking, a much more of an ecosystem approach to innovation. So bringing within its fold business models, looking at innovations and business models, looking at the design of the policies and regulations that need to make things work, looking at, of course, technology and the infrastructure that's needed, but also how do you build more robust systems and how do you operate them more efficiently. And that's something that you will also see is the philosophy that we take into our programs, which IRENA actually, or rather initiatives that IRENA has launched on empowering lives and livelihoods and transitioning remote communities to renewable energy. So it's about, these two initiatives are really about using innovation in how productive uses of renewable energy can empower people, can bring the sustainable livelihoods that we want to see. So, one of the key philosophies that we have tried to embed in these two initiatives is that access to clean energy is not an end goal. It is what people will do with this form of energy that we need to be more concerned and bothered about. So is it powering a irrigation pump? Is it helping in horticulture with drip irrigation that's getting powered by solar? Or is it helping in post-harvest technology that adds to the value that the farmers, the small farmers, would be bringing into the market. So let me just take you very briefly through some of the work and assessments that we've done at IRENA, which will give you a flavor of what I said earlier about how we're making sure that we're making it a more holistic kind of initiative. So when we talk about innovation with policy and regulations, we did a assessment in Malawi and Guinea, where we found that still the policy on energy access focuses on the minimal, electricity that can be provided as solar home lighting. And many countries, unfortunately, haven't moved beyond that. So, in these countries, we found that there were entrepreneurs, mini grid operators that were really crying out for support and for policy support, which would help them move out of that limbo where they couldn't even fix tariff. They didn't know how and who would operate the systems after that, because there was no underpinning of a policy that would enable the ones that exist, but the many more that were willing to come into those countries. So it really, pointed out to us and helped us engage with the government on the importance of having a strong policy framework and not just, leave this to the margins and think that it just might happen as something as a byproduct, because it's not a byproduct. It has to be done intentionally. Then regarding the technologies, we had an assessment in Nepal where we saw these micro hydro powering carpentry shops and many other kind of commercial operations. But the kind of implements and appliances that were being used were either very, they were not affordable or not that robust, which meant that you had to really look at the after-sales service and things like that. So there is, of course, a huge need for innovating more efficient and to customize these products for the low energy needs that exist in these kind of settings. If I look at business models, in our study, it came out very evidently in Rwanda, where we saw how energy as a service model from a company like Ignite Power enabled users to lease productive appliances and pay over a duration of time. And I'm very pleased that we do have Ignite Energy Access here as a part of our panel to speak about it. And financing. Financing has really been the bottleneck because these are small, small farmers that we're talking about. They're marginal farmers who are, surviving on maybe rain-fed agriculture most of the time, and they're mostly locked out of the formal credit system and have very unrealistic interest rates that they have to pay and very huge demands on collateral, which normally they wouldn't have. So here also we're seeing that results-based financing, concessional loans, and blended capital instruments are now increasingly coming to support these last-mile connectivity for the productive use of energy. And in Zimbabwe, we found that access to the cooperative credit system really did have a huge uptake of farmers getting into solar-powered pumps. And that's how, a credit line, which is then made available, can really change the whole scene very quickly. So I just want to leave you with two more thoughts. And one is that, when you're talking about innovation, we have to be inclusive, because most of the times when you're talking about productive use of energy and you're talking about rural users of energy in the rural settings, it's mostly women who would be the end users. And our systems, our approaches have to keep that in mind and have to do it with the intentionality that it needs to have. So the financial tools must be gender responsive and have built-in inclusive ownership models and technologies that are easy for them to use. They shouldn't be designed for men because, a lot of the times you have appliances that are designed for men but are being used for women, and it really, it's a lot of grunge work for them. And finally, I think, I really liked what Dr. Lee Sheng said in the opening remarks yesterday, that shared bread always tastes better. So it's really I think, the South-South cooperation is a very powerful tool. And having an exchange of between the countries that are going through a similar kind of stage at the energy transition, I think that it becomes a very powerful tool for learning and for exchange of knowledge. In fact, we had a visit recently that some of the people that we work with in our member states went to the Selco Foundation in India and have come back with so many ideas. So sometimes it's just that visit that's needed to catalyze and get them to start thinking of the possibilities. So I hope this discussion today will help us take our work forward, will also help us build strength into this narrative, because productive use of energy is often talked about at the margins, because the glamour of energy transition is often in the grids, which is also important and it's necessary. But this cannot be marginalized. This is equally important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gauri, for bringing your wide experience in the productive use applications globally. I now call on stage Kavita Rai. She'll be giving a scene-setting presentation on the productive uses of energy, matured or fragmented, the need for innovation towards livelihood outcomes. Kavita Rai is a senior program officer within IRENA, leading the energy access and cross-sectional work in country engagements at partnership divisions in IRENA. She has 30 years of experience in IRENA, working in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and small island developing states in designing and delivering a range of programs, including capacity development, entrepreneurship development, financing, gender, and policy. Kavita, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and I'm really glad to see a full room. It's post-lunch. I hope this will be a very interesting session to boost up all our spirits. Like Gauri said, I think Gauri did a lot of scene setting, so maybe I'll shorten my presentation. But like Gauri said, we at IRENA are really committed towards energy access. We want to do a lot more for those people, for the millions of people who have no electricity access. And productive use goes beyond, right, to livelihoods. And this is where I think our work at IRENA comes from. I always like to start with a small anecdote of my own work. 30 years ago, I'm from Nepal, and I started working in microhydro, in the hydropower sector, worked in villages, and they were just engineers those days. There were only 2 social scientists. I was one of them. And what happened was the engineers decided, okay, daytime load, it's not having, these are 20 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt systems. What do we do? Then they started drumming up ideas on what sort of technologies can come in. Low wattage, clean cooking with electricity, right? 50 watt, 100 watt. There was Lokta paper to make paper. So they drummed up, a drum to use the electricity during the daytime. There were all sorts of productive uses that were being done. And those were initial years, imagine, this was 30 years ago. And it was very technology focused. So my job was to find out why is technology itself not being successful? And so on and so forth, 30 years down the line. I'm glad I'm talking about productive use. I don't think it has moved so far as I expected it to be, But, but here we are. I'm sure our esteemed panel will explain a lot about the challenges that we continue to have. And really, I'm really glad to see, as a social scientist, a systemic thinking, like Gauri said at IRENA, we're looking at innovation. So what's innovation really? Innovation's something new, right? In the way of our doing things, of new technologies, of new business models, of new market integration. So I think all these brought together, I think, is what IRENA terms as systemic innovation. And I know IRENA, my colleague presented this yesterday, and our colleagues at IITC are bringing out a report, a third flagship report, an innovation landscape report in the autumn, that also this time looks at productive uses and also looks at rural development. And there are 17 different elements out there. Yesterday there was a session on energy community. Today we're going to look a little bit into powering agriculture sector. We just signed an MOU with GOGLA today, and we're working with GOGLA and a whole host of other organizations on how we can move this forward. I wouldn't go into the details of this, and neither this, because I think I just wanted to show you, that there are so many drivers we need to look at. That innovation in one doesn't mean success. Innovation needs to be looked at an ecosystem approach, as a systemic approach. We cannot just say that because we have a digital technology that it'll be successful, that people will be able to use it. No, I think you need to then look at finance, you need to look at business delivery models, you need to look at supply and demand, what is the market? So there are a whole host of issues. In policy, for example, in our own work, we are working cross-ministerial. It will be nice to see cross-ministerial, interministerial sort of policies, right? We would like to see, we're trying to get together ministries to come together and work together as even technical committees, and that's been a challenge. So I think we at IRENA are also trying to also innovate and see what can we work and how can we put all this together as one package, because I think we need to look at it holistically. And even as we design, programs, we want the programs to be more having a bundled approach, not just having one. So it's much more complex, but I think that complexity is needed sometimes, even if the solutions we think are simple. And unfortunately, I think as the more rural you go, the more work that you have in development, we have a huge element and a large focus on gender and equity, because if we go to the villages, 40, 50, 60% are females. So I think these elements, we try to see if any programmatic design that we promote needs to look at that sort of ecosystem approach and have more bundled approaches. And I think I will welcome then all of the panel members to speak more about it. Gauri has already mentioned the Empowering Lives and Livelihoods initiative. This we launched at COP28. And we're going into cross sectors, because electricity and energy is not just about lighting. It is about productive use. It is about lives, which is health, and livelihoods, which is agriculture for us. And we are working, we have a bit of a macro system, because IRENA is not an implementing agency. So we work with countries, we work with the Ministry of Energy, who are focal points, and then they in turn, connect us to the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health, so on and so forth, and Ministries of Environment, because we're also looking at adaptation, how women and youth, for example, are adapting. So to look at all these, then we work in the countries, and we go through a 6, 8, even a 1-year process to look at this, have interactions with stakeholders. And then we are also trying to work with implementers on the ground, because we are not an implementing agency, and to see if we can really build together a program and seek further funding. And this is our 2nd year, so we are into that stage now, and we're excited because now we're talking to various multilaterals, to various donors, to see if the possibility of funding would be there. And then we're working in about 9 countries for agriculture and 5 for health. I just wanted to show you a little, this is more of a technology approach, but I wanted to show you that when we do our work on agri-food, we look at really the whole value chain, mostly pre-production, post-production, farm to fork sometimes, but it's a bit challenging, I think, to do that sort of analysis, but we try our best. And really, we see a lot of across most of the countries that we work are in Africa. There's one in Asia, some are in small island states. We're starting work in Cuba, for example. But most of the time, we see that there are renewable energy-powered solutions in each step of the value chain. But you know what? If we go beyond this assessment of only looking at renewables and going back to our systemic thinking, even in Nepal, we did our assessment, it was fine, the report was almost ready, and then I went and I said, okay, let me look at the suppliers of these cold power chains, cold chains. There were very few. So then I even told the government, I don't think Nepal is ready for a scale-up program because the supply chain is just not there. So we need to, I think the government then needs to look at that a little bit closely. Then there are, of course, policies, there are regulations, there are, no subsidies and so on and so forth. So I think this is the approach we've taken. So in each of the value chain, in each country, we look at about 4 or 5 agri-food value chain. I give you an example of Malawi, which Gauri also mentioned. We're working now with the Dairy Farm Association to see if we can develop a program, because we looked at 5 agri-food value chain, dairy, rice, aquaculture, vegetables, legumes, right? And then I think deciding then with the country itself, we then choose which way do you want to go, because each value chain can be very complex, as you can imagine, and especially if you have this systemic approach of looking at policy to technology to business models to everything. So then we decided that we will focus on the milk value chain, particularly because 41% of the milk is lost. Why? Not just because there is not electricity. Even if there's electricity, there's unreliable electricity. And this is a very common theme that we're finding in many of our assessments. In fact, in Nepal, we found that farmers are innovating themselves to see how they can use their irrigation pumps to use electricity from a weak grid, and as well as solar backups, right? So farmers are doing that on their own, but there needs to be innovation then from the private sector too. So I think we are trying now to see if we can design a program with Selco Foundation, our partners, and see if we can get funding for this, which will be great. Really, I want to end with partnerships, because in this day and age, all of us are here. We have to be brutally honest that funding is very tight. But at the same time, I think I'm always an optimist. I believe, over 3 decades, I've seen from what I saw in Nepal, when I started out, to what it is today. There's a long leap and there's a lot of learning. But this learning needs to be cross-sectoral. The learning needs to be cross-stakeholders. The learning needs to be there, government to government. So this is something that IRENA is doing quite well, I think, at the moment. We try, like Gauri was saying, we took government and private sector people to India to learn from the experience that India has in terms of technology, in terms of policy. And then we're trying to see if we can set up a special technical facility for assistance to countries in Africa. And with GOGLA, I think Carlos is here and he will moderate the session. But Carlos has been leading this with full spirit, bless you, Carlos, and bringing all of us together, including IRENA, to look at an energy coalition where we talk sometimes to agri people and we say, oh, do we understand what they're saying? And they're saying, oh, do we understand what you are saying? So we're always having these dialogues and trying to understand what the other sectoral players are, trying to understand what the lingo is, right? So I think this sort of coalition really is important, that instead of working independently, we work, we consult, we co-create, and we collaborate. And hopefully in these partnerships, we can also have bigger and better results at the end. A paper was written, Beyond Silos, by all the organizations, IRENA included, and we have a key call to action, particularly for governments, but really welcoming different stakeholders to come together and work together. And really, it's very important because it's not just about electricity, it's about livelihoods, it's about jobs, it's about skills, right? So we need to really build up a body body of evidence, because I think if you don't have an evidence base, then the policy change might be difficult. Well, some people might say no, but I always believe that evidence-based solutions and evidence-based policy making is needed, and this is what the coalition, the Agri-Energy Coalition, is trying to do, and I'm sure Carlos can talk more about it. But I'll end it at this and not take any more time, because we want to have more interactions and learnings from you, and I really look forward to the whole session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kavita. I think with that, I'll just call upon Carlos to come on stage. Carlos is currently working with GOGLA as Senior Project Manager for Productive Uses of Renewable Energy, and is the global lead in this field in GOGLA. With over 18 years of professional experience, Carlos is an expert in the field of energy access, renewable energies, and market-based approaches and climate change. He has worked in diverse energy-related projects placed in more than over 40 countries worldwide. Thank you, Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks to IRENA and for this opportunity, and thanks everyone for having come to the room and listen to this, as Kavita said, long story of productive uses, which is not something that we just invented yesterday. It's been a long avenue. Today we, as Kavita said, and I think I couldn't present it better, we are witnessing a new phase for the energy access space or sector, in which we can and have to talk to others. We can no longer talk between ourselves. I mean, energy folks is fine, is really interesting, but we really need to stop talking among ourselves. We need to start talking up with agri, water, environment-based institutions, and change the language. As Kavita said, we need to really understand each other, and that's not happening yet to the level that we wish. And I can tell you that as an engineer, and having devoted part of my life to energy, is extremely complex. Terms such as, like even climate-based terms, or even, like electricity, like productive uses. If you come to a room with agricultural folks and you talk about productive uses, no one will understand you, because they speak about mechanization, because they speak about things that, yes, they are the same, but we don't understand each other. So we need to start changing the terminologies and the way we approach each other. Now, at GOGLA is an industry association, so we represent over 200 private sector companies that operate, manufacture, distribute appliances or energy off-grid solar services in South Asia and Africa. And we've been working in the space for over 13 years now. We've seen a huge change in the energy access landscape. Over 540 million people got access to electricity just as a result of our members, our companies, distributing solar home systems. So there's a huge impact we can really do if we work all together. And I think the panel today is just a clear, real example of how different stakeholders can come together and work together. Now, the panel that I'm going to be facilitating today, and I'm really glad to be doing it, has something, all the panelists have something very much in common. First is they believe on productive uses, which is not an easy task, considering we've been working on this for 30 years now, right? But they believe the market is taking off. And I can tell you the market is taking off. We see the numbers in some segments more than in others, but we see the change in the space. The people are looking at it as with confidence, and that's really important. But the second thing that that connects all of them is that they all are systemic thinking scholars. They believe on systemic thinking, and that's extremely important when you've been working and walking on the desert for 10 years now. We see the things are changing because we are pushing, and we are pushing because we are working together, and I think that's extremely important. So let me call upon panelists to sit on the chairs. Dynamic in the room will be, they will be doing short presentations, each of them, and then we will jump into a hopefully productive discussion. Also, you have a Slido on the right that you can utilize for writing your questions. People can vote for the questions. Those that are going to be the most voted can be questions that we can utilize for the conversation. So let me call upon the panelists. The first one being Matthew Matimbwi, who is the Executive Secretary at the Tanzanian Renewable Energy Association. Please, a warm round of applause. Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. The next will be Divya Balakrishnan. I hope I'm pronouncing the surname well. Thank you. Senior Advisor at GET.Invest. Please, a round of applause for her. Thank you. Please, next one is Ulrich Zimmerman, CEO of the company Zimpertec. Thanks, Ulrich. And please, a round of applause. Thank you. And the last panelist is Barbara Richard, who is the team leader of Energizing Development under GIZ. Thanks, Barbara. Please, a round of applause. I'm not gonna present myself, each of them, because they have like lots of years of experience. So I will allow you to present yourself, okay, when you come in here. We will start with the first presentation, who I believe is Ulrich. So please, Ulrich, come here and every single one of you have 5 minutes, okay? And then after that, we will commence the discussion. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me? Nice. So my name is Ulrich Zimmerman. I'm from the company Zimpertec, as you might already recognize in the name of the company. So there is family heritage in that. Yeah. So we are a company fully dedicated to solar home systems. We are a B2B company, so we design, we engineer, and we manufacture. And basically my father started that 30 years ago. So that's when he started in the off-grid areas, developing off-grid charge controllers, being in various companies before starting Zimpertec 15 years ago. Yeah. And what we want to talk today about is the productive use segment, yeah, which is definitely one of the big topics in the recent years. Everybody's talking about it. I think there is still a lot more to be done in that segment, yeah, because it's not, let's say, the silver bullet, which is easy to do. It's actually the one which has a lot of potential, but is actually even more difficult to reach. Yeah? And therefore, I think this is what is, from a practical standpoint, something we need to dive in. Yeah? And what I want to do today is a bit sharing about our experience from the field. Yeah? And one of the topics, as we saw before, is like if we look on the processing chain of different kind of goods, let it be meat, let it be milk, let it be just shops where you sell yogurt or something. Yeah, cooling is definitely a big part of it. And what we can really see, because we did that across all continents. Yeah, so we are doing this in Southeast Asia, we are doing this in Africa, we are doing this in Latin America. Basically, as we are pretty much close to the equator, it works more or less the same. Yeah? So we can basically say there can be standardized solutions across the areas, despite that we always argue there are, let's say, everything must be 100% customized, which I think is the wrong approach, because we need to standardize actually also in the long run, because we need to be able to, in the long run, also maintain what is actually in the field. And for that, we did now already many projects for cooling and especially freezing, which is the thing also in Africa, which is even more important than just cooling refrigeration. Yeah? If we look in how we actually did that, is really we try to leverage data into the design of our systems. Yeah? So basically, we combine a bigger solar home system with a very energy efficient refrigerator or freezer. And that one, we basically have tons of data analyzed from the field on how much energy we actually consume, because basically all the lab data is wrong. Yeah, because the lab data is not really showing what's going on in the field. Yeah? And for that, we are really trying to capitalize on many kind of different data points. If we look into another segment that we're also piloting right now, interesting. So here, so far, everything was DC, yeah, so direct current without an inverter, yeah, in a nutshell. Now, if we are looking into milling, we're actually trying to leverage the cheaper appliance, yeah, meaning we are going AC now, because there with more standardized appliances, more common appliances in the market, we can try to lower the cost on that end. And for that, we basically try to make the energy as easily available as possible. So basically, it's similar like a generator, right? A diesel generator, but you're trying to do this in a solar fashion, where you have a battery, where you have solar to run it, and leveraging pay-as-you-go. So basically, rent-to-own possibilities, to make technology more affordable. So on this one, maybe in future there might be more insights on that. Overall, I think my call to action would be really, if we are looking into off-grid areas, try to incentivize rather reliability over lower cost. Because the thing is really also in the productive use segment, what we are seeing in the recent years, everybody is trying to put down the cost for this kind of solutions, which is to a fair extent not possible to really minimize it to get it really low. So therefore, better focus on reliability, because at the end of the day, if we are trying now to make it as cheap as possible, it will not serve the purpose in the long run. One big part of it is easier access to finance, because such assets are more capital intense. So all the distributors in the field who actually lease it then to the end customer, they are a bank, more or less, because basically they are financing it to people in rural areas without proper possibilities for a credit check. So therefore, there must be easier access for that companies to finance, and I think really focus on what works. Look what works and try to scale that instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. Because that's really what we've like. Again, my family is in this since 30 years, and I already taught to Carlos before. Like all the time, I'm like, oh, look, father, there's something new, and he's like, 40 years ago that was done already. So really, let's focus now on what works instead of trying to reinventing the wheel all the time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ulrich. And I think it's very stimulating to start the presentations with real technologies and technologies that work, that are commercially viable and are happening in some of the countries where we focus. So that question of, is the technology ready? Yes, it is. Now, I think he's been chasing a point that is extremely important for the productive use space, which is finance. And finance is not to be taken easily, because finance involves not just a certain level of incentives, but also guarantees, insurance schemes, etc., that helps companies to survive walking in the desert when you want to manufacture, import, and distribute. And before your company dies, you need to still keep, like getting on, right? So finance is important, and we will talk about that later. So thanks a lot, Ulrich, for all these amazing points. The next panelist is Matthew. Matthew works for TAREA in Tanzania. Please, Matthew, over to you, and thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, thank you. As I've been already introduced, I'm Matthew Matimbwi. I am the German scholar. I studied at the University of Flensburg, where I did my master's degree and PhD in renewable energy. I'm going to talk about policy and regulations. As you know that in order to do investment in energy, these are very important parameters to prepare ground for the game. If there are no policies or regulations which are guiding any type of business, it's not easy for people to come to invest. And before I jump into policies which have to be improved or put in place, I would like to tell you that there's a syndrome going around. I don't know in other countries. When you talk about energy, people think that energy is only electricity. This is not true. Energy comes in different forms. Even you can see in our meeting, most of the discussions were almost dominated by electricity. But in productive use, there are other forms of energy, like heat energy. I want to tell you, this is the truth. My mom was cooking local liquor using firewood, and the money made me now who I am. Yeah, so that was a heat energy. She did not use electricity. So when we are talking about productive use of energy, the subject energy, there are different forms. And all forms have their roles, depends on what you're talking about. Please, if you are a policymaker, I see in my country, Tanzania, energy, always they talk energy is electricity, energy is electricity. It's not true. Yeah, we have other forms of energy. So now I would like to tell you which policies, these are only a few, which have to be worked upon. We have to have very good policies which will guide energy. And these are forms which you can already see on the board. Yeah, and then we have to have a very good guiding policy on research and development. This is the area where people are working. I'll give you an example. In Tanzania now, we are working with a project financed by European Union called SWAM-E. This is a consortium of 16 partners, European and Africa, and we are working in the area of science and technology, focusing on the new model of mini-grid. It's only because the policy in these countries support what we are doing. Another area is agriculture. Yeah, if you talk with people of agriculture, as it has already been pointed out, they know only, if you talk with the people of agriculture, they think that energy is only driving tractors plowing on the farm. But it's beyond that. Yeah, when you look a chain of agriculture. So people of agriculture have to have a policy which supports a PURE. And then blue economy, for example, fishing. People of fishery, they have to come with a policy which is supporting the use of productive use of energy. I will show you one picture in the next slide. Animal husbandry. We need lights. We have now insect repelling. Yeah. So animal husbandry also, they have to make policy statements which will allow people to develop PURE. And transport, this is quite well known. In my country, Tanzania, people are always selling EVs. But if you look at the transport policy, there is not even a single statement supporting EV. This is very dangerous for investment. Tomorrow, when they make their a policy statement, you might find that some people might be affected on their investment they are doing. So I would like this to come first place. Also, industries, powering machines. Yeah, we have a lot of machines that can be powered using renewable energy. For example, it has been already said in India, I was among the people through CELCO who visited a productive use of renewable energy in India, and their industry is powered by renewable energy. In the area of finance, we have to have policies in financing SMEs so that a productive use of energy can access finance. Also, service industry. I don't like to repeat. My colleague has already presented about cooling, for example. This have to be supported. The water sector and also the area of communication. Now I want to show, this is one of the area in fishing where we are using solar light for fishing business. Apart from using clean energy, but also it's cheaper. People used to use kerosene pressure lamps, which were expensive and also was not safe. Now about, oh, sorry, I've been so quick. Yeah, regulatory environment. The governments have to develop regulations related to incentives, technology transfers, and also about emerging solutions like green hydrogen. Yeah. And also regulations on the public use in the research environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thanks for keeping the time. I know it's hard because we have a lot of stories and a lot of knowledge, and it's complicated to always bring it up to the audience. But I think in summary, if countries need to have long, stable policies that are clear for investors, also for private sector companies to operate, gives clarity for a segment that requires a lot of clarity. The investment is important. And so we've seen a lot of stories, as Matthew was explaining, on the policy framework for productive uses. And fortunately, there are some countries that are really moving forward in a very positive manner, and governments are doing like some smart moves that allows companies to start investing. The next, well, you've been listening to the topic of policy, which I think is crucial. Also the topic of supply and technologies plus finance. And there are obviously some challenges we've been listening over the past 10 minutes. Now we're gonna invite the next panelist, who is working for an international development partner, aiming to give some solutions to these challenges. She's Divya. Divya works for GET.Invest. She's the senior advisor at GET.Invest. Yeah, and please don't forget to write your questions on a slide if you have any, okay? Thanks, Divya, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to keep it within the 5 minutes. Let's solve all the financing problems of PUE in the next 5 minutes. No. But yes, I work for GET.Invest, and GET.Invest is a European program. We're funded by the European Commission. Also Germany, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Austria. And we're implemented by the GIZ, so I'm also a GIZ employee. And basically at GET.Invest, we provide technical assistance in order to prepare companies and projects in the clean energy sector to access finance. And therefore, PUE is one of our largest portfolios. Indeed, the number you see there, 91, these are 91 clients we worked with in the PUE sector specifically, but we need to consider that PUE is also a very overlapping sector. So many of our clients from the C&I and micro mini-grid sectors are not included here. If I would include that number, it would be around 120 clients. And so currently we have 46 active clients in the pipeline or in our portfolio whom we're actively preparing to raise financing for. Additionally, we've successfully introduced 37 of the 91 clients to financiers, and 25 of them have so far reached financial closes of different kinds. And that investment size being 49 million that we mobilized for them. So as you see, it's a very up and growing sector. If I had this presentation 2 years ago, those numbers would look very small in comparison. So just saying there's space for optimism here. So what you see here is a financing and scaling of productive use of energy paper that we published 2 years ago. And this was created based on our advisory team's experiences from working with the PUE companies, but then also over 35 investors, funders, TA providers were interviewed for this. So we kind of had a complementary outlook. And then the main challenges, opportunities, and how we can strengthen PUE was put together. You can access the paper online anytime. I'm very quickly going to highlight the main challenges out there. Basically, what we're seeing is investors' requirements and then the business structure of PUE companies are quite mismatched, which is causing this, segmented and small tickets that basically don't serve the purpose that the PUE companies need. Also, due to the risk, perceived risk, and then also the shortage of local currency loans out there, the local debt is quite limited in appetite. The FX mismatches also, of course, because we do work specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, and in that context, many countries do have quite a bit of currency fluctuations and inflation that affects lending. What we are also seeing on the other end is that PUE is treated just like C&I, for instance, and then underwriting principles of other market segments are being applied to PUE businesses, which again causes a mismatch. In addition, investor teams are normally segmented sector-wise, so it's a C&I sector or an energy sector or agriculture sector, right? But PUE is a nexus of these different sectors, and so you need investment officers who understand both agriculture and energy perspective, and that's not happening. So PUE basically falls through the gaps of investors, but also of policy makers in a sense. Lastly, and not the least, project developers. At the project developers' ends or at the company's ends, the PUE company end, what we notice is low utilization rates makes investors refrain from investing in them, of course. Business models are not very structured, and also they need a lot of fine-tuning for financial viability of these companies. So that being said, hasn't moved? Yeah. That being said, how we support companies to basically access finance is we take them through a whole set of services that you see up there, right from support starting from business development, meaning if they need a credit risk management advisory, we would support them in setting it up from scratch to the end. But it could also be something as simple as your company's branding and image is not looking great, so we would also support you in trying to improve on that. But then taking the company from there to guiding them on what kind of investment should they be looking for, debt, equity, etc., preparing them for it, and then all the way up to introducing them to financiers and supporting them on the due diligence, and in many cases also post-investment support where required. And in that sense, the approaches we have in terms of advisory is we really recommend and support these companies in establishing strong partnerships. So for instance, engaging with farmer associations or cooperatives. So when you have a strong off-taker, then investors have more confidence to invest in you. Additionally, also lowering end-user upfront costs, because to keep in mind, the end users in many of the PUE cases are rural, local farmers, right? And their ability to pay is a very big question when it comes to the financial viability of these companies. And also going on financial approaches, we work quite a bit in trying to get investors to be more open. We also approach MFIs and kind of support companies in really ensuring the conversation goes further with them. So I've basically here highlighted what the different actions that financiers and also donors can be taking as a summary from all of the approaches we take in our advisory work. So basically, early stage patient equity is really important, but it's missing. Also, long-term working capital and also capital that's attuned to PUE businesses, because PUE businesses are quite capital intense or capex intense. Also, enabling innovative models of end-user financing, which is happening, but we need to see more of those. So pay-go, lease-to-own, etc. Energy as a service, as has been mentioned earlier. Also, there needs to be more crowdfunding, and basically any kind of financing that exists out there needs to be tuned to the PUE business requirements, and that's something I'd like to highlight. On the other hand, for donors, capacity building of the local finance institutions to enable them to lend locally, but also to address FX risks, and also de-risking equity funds. So donors can come in really by providing guarantees and by providing risk instruments that empowers investors out there. Yeah, and last but not the least, RBS, and I know that my colleague from EnDev will speak about it, but what we have seen is results-based financing has been quite catalytic in ensuring investors have more confidence in investing in PUE businesses. And with that said, I'll hand it over to Carlos.
Thanks, Divya, and I think I would like to highlight a couple of points. I mean, all of them are right, but there are two that are extremely important from my point of view. One is innovation is not just a technology word. It's not just applicable for technologies and business models. Innovation also is a word that donors and implementing partners and financiers also need to apply. So let's not hope companies will save the world. We need to accompany them with very innovative approaches. So GET.Invest has done a lot of that, and I think it's a leader on the space. But others need to copy and as well deliver innovative approaches to bring finance to the sector. The other point is, believe it or not, in many of the Sub-Saharan or the African countries, we find ourselves talking to entities that are working in silos. As Kavita said before, beyond silos is important. In the recent history of collaboration with different entities like multilateral development banks, we find ourselves that with the same multilateral bank is delivering a program with the Ministry of Energy and a similar program with the Ministry of Agri. The multilateral development bank is not internally following a systemic thinking approach. So different teams are delivering different programs with different rates of subsidies to the same companies on the ground, which is creating a lot of disruption. I think the call to those are following a systemic thinking, improving the way Nexus is integrated internally, and governments will then have the tools they need to implement correctly and rightly, like a productive use segment, because it's not happening at the moment, and that's a big problem for the private sector companies and also for the customers. Our next final panelist presenting is Barbara. Barbara works for Energizing Development Program from the GIZ, and she's the team leader. So Barbara, please hand it over to you, and thanks a lot for the time.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me well? So we are after lunch, and I had 3 speakers before me, plus 2 really good inputs at the beginning. That's a bit of a challenge to be able to give you some new inputs, but I will try my best. And see if I can manage this. Yes, great. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Productive use is actually one of my favorite topics, looking back on more than 15 years in the energy access sector. It has been there for quite some time. But it's really nice to see that the topic is really starting to take off. We have the private sector sitting here. 10 years back, you would have really struggled to find private sector on a larger scale being active in this field. You would have struggled to find investors and financiers even being interested in the topic. So it might be a slow development, but it's there, and I'm very happy to see that. We have seen throughout the years many innovations and approaches. Some of them sometimes are still presented as new innovations. Sometimes we recognize certain things again, but I think that's not too bad. So sometimes innovations came in as an idea at the wrong point in time. The markets were not ready, the enabling environment was not there, but some ideas that were left as a PowerPoint project 10 years ago are today at a stage where they can be implemented and really put into reality. From the Energizing Development Program, for those who don't know us, we are a global program working on energy access since 20 years. We are working in Africa and Asia and had as well a very strong portfolio in Latin America, including the productive use of energy. And you see here that our target group, which are small and medium-sized enterprises, so not the energy companies, but really the productive use, we have reached more than 110,000 of them. Most of them from the agricultural value chains, but as well anything else that a community in a rural village in Africa needs. I want to start with a fundamental point, and I think at least we here on the panel all agree that electricity and access to clean cooking both jointly are a driver for economic development. It's a precondition. Access to energy itself is not fulfilling any purpose. A socket that you don't use is not creating any added value or impact. So we need to think beyond to trigger this kind of development that we all want to see. And therefore we need to work closely with local partners, with the political partners, and with people, for example, from agricultural value chains. We've heard about that nexus thinking already, to bring really the services and products into the value chains outside of the energy sector that they need. The second fundamental point I want to share is that productive use is not only about electricity. And Matthew from Tanzania said that already, but I think it's a really crucial point to understand that solutions should be addressing the needs of the people, the needs of those companies, those small-scale companies and farmers. And if I now talk about cook stoves, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about a small restaurant by the roadside in Africa. Let me give you an example where this interlinkage between electricity and heat, thermal energy, is very explicit. The production of shea butter. It's an extremely complex process. So first, you have to boil the nuts, then you have to dry them, then you have to wash and clean them, then you have to dry them again. Then you crush them, and then you roast them, then you grind them and boil them again to then separate the oil. So it's not this one-off machine that will solve it all, but it's highly complex processes, and people in that business need a whole variety of different processing steps and solutions, which are not only electricity, but as well heat. That's why we as well pursue an integrated approach, on the one hand in terms of not only focusing on the small-scale enterprises, but as well on households and social institutions to address all energy needs of the populations in our partner countries. But as well because the private sector in many cases, when they set up distribution networks, they have a range of products. So we try to make it as easy as possible for our target groups to access technologies, but as well for the private sector to be active in those areas. What we as well do observe is that growing recognition internationally, again, for the topic of productive use, and it's increasing in attention, what is really positive to see. But of course, this needs a strategy, because productive use is a big topic. What we do is that basically we work with a defined overarching strategy in terms of working in that integrated approach, being an energy access program. But then we need to leave enough flexibility working in so many countries, because each and every country is different. Each and every value chain is different. Each and every political partner has different priorities. So our teams on the ground are able to address those specific needs. And flexibility here is really key. So why do we do it actually? I mean, in the end, it's about impact and sustainability. Impact is we're changing lives on the ground, and sustainability is not only for the target groups, but as well for the companies selling products, providing financing. MSMEs have a really good forecast in terms of paying back, because they are earning money, they are generating income. Let me check where I am. Here I am. Now, where it becomes really complicated is that, of course, it is a very diverse topic. We have countless value chains. We have countless types of SMEs. So it is important to as well focus. And I would like to highlight one specific aspect in terms of focus, and that is the economic empowerment of women. In many, many value chains, specifically in Africa, it is women that are running businesses. So thinking about this interlinkage of coupling productive use promotion with women's economic empowerment is a very impactful measure, specifically in rural areas. We see women as a driver of change, so 24% of the MSMEs that we've supported last year were all led by women. And we are very proud that we are at almost a quarter and hope to be even better in the future. Now, let's look into success factors. As I mentioned already, EnDev is looking back on 20 years right now, so we are in the process to as well review all the learnings and things we've done over 20 years. And one of the main learnings is really that integrated approach to think energy and beyond, and to recognize for yourself where's the end of your knowledge and of your expertise and of your mandate being a program from the energy sector. What we look into is where's our additionality. So we look into target groups, we look into community focus, holistic approach, we look into smallholder farmers as like bundled groups we can address. We look into selecting specific value chains to keep a focus in our implementation that are most relevant on country level. And we look into how to structure our projects, on the one hand being an energy access program, needing partners to go that step beyond and outside of the energy sector. And we've seen a significant uptake of results-based financing approaches, where the instrument itself is quite well established, but for productive use, not yet to the same scale as for household appliances, and we are very happy to see that happening. In addition, you have as well the focus on the supply side and technologies. It needs to be complemented by so many other topics like the enabling environment, access to finance for private sector, for as well the customers. So the pieces of the puzzle are really complex, and my 5 minutes are not enough time to go through everything here. In terms of challenges, I think the biggest challenge for productive use is complexity and that diversification level that you need to really target the needs. So we need a certain level of standardization, be it focusing on a certain value chain, be it focusing on a certain technology or target group, or the way we work as a development cooperation program to manage that kind of flexibility, of complexity. And we should not forget that we are stepping into the world of market dynamics. So if you change something in the value chain, if you start supporting a farmer to process crops and try to send an added value processed good, you need to think about the whole rest of the value chain. What happens to the next level person usually buying the product as it is raw coming from the field? It's not only about technology and individual business cases, but it's a systemic change that you need to drive. And an energy access program alone will never ever manage to do that. We need those partners to work on it, to work on infrastructure and access to markets, and to bring everybody on board so that change is not a threat or not perceived as a threat, but that it is really perceived as an opportunity for everybody. Secondly, I think the big thing that is ahead for all of us is to bring productive use really to scale. We have seen really good developments for solar water pumping. Cooling has been going up and then down again, but there are so many other productive uses and value chains where we are still waiting for that moment. And that is the big challenge. How can we bundle? How can we bring actors together to really get to scale? And as my last statement, now you might be wondering why my presentation had innovation on top. I think there have been lots of innovations and 15, 20, 30 years of discussions. Before innovating again, where it is maybe not necessary, let's focus first on getting things to scale, having a solid sector in more countries, and then go back to innovation. We need to get out of this, we need something new discussion, because right now we need the standardized, the solid, from a financial perspective, boring projects. Boring is good, because boring means investors come in. Boring means companies come in. So let's make productive use boring. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Barbara. Hopefully you can hear me. Well, thanks also to the EnDev team. It's been a truly long experience and insightful program that has brought a lot of learnings. Amazing to have seen this program going on and hoping for many more years to come. Thanks for sharing all this knowledge and experience with us. As I said before, please, if any of the topics has raised any questions or you want to have a question, please use the Slido. Oh, I see some questions already there. Is there any chance we can see the questions in this screen? There we go. So we have ahead of us, we have approximately 15 minutes to have a, hopefully productive discussion. I think we've been raising a lot of points and topics, so the conversation has been quite enriching. I've prepared a couple of questions for the panelists, but I'm going to just do one per panelist, so we have a space also for questions from the audience. Let me start with Ulrich. Ulrich, based on your presentation, based on your experience and that from your father as well, and the whole, the family experience that you guys have accrued, what do you think is missing today to move the needle to get productive uses one step further? Over to you.
I clearly see the point of standardization. Yeah, like my colleague before already said, like standardize, use what's there, get stuff rolling. Yeah, because even like in the cooling segment, we are trying to over and over innovate instead of just like putting the pedal to the metal. Yeah, and I think that's basically need for finance, probably also some kind of subsidies in place to really take it off, because productive use is more expensive, but will pay in the long run, right? So, and more slower capital, because right now, more or less, if you look in the industry, everything is debt, right? There's more or less no equity for that kind of companies who do the distribution. And that's the big hurdle, because they need to have slow capital to grow, to maintain, and to build the business.
Thank you. Thanks, Ulrich. I think reiterating some points that are connecting us with, I think the standardization element is also connecting or connected to public policies somehow. I think let's jump into Matthew. Matthew, you've been talking about policies and regulations, and you have obviously a lot of experience working with the public in Tanzania. How can the private sector that you're representing do more together to innovate, particularly in the space of cross-sectorial areas with the Ministry of Agri, considering also the point from Ulrich on standardization, for instance, for productive uses?
Yeah, thank you very much. Our experience shows that working with a government authority like Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Fishery and the Livestock has been very easy compared to the Ministry of Energy. The challenge is that now you find that Minister of Energy is only thinking of big projects, but also even if you want to try to work together with the Minister of Energy, then comes mistrust. Private sector in Tanzania does not trust public authorities because they don't meet their commitments. If you say we have share cost, when it comes to investment, you might find that only a private sector is putting money. And this is not a fair game. But these two ministries, I've given you examples. They are ministries that are directly working with people. And even if you look on their structure, you can find an agriculture officer at a village or a fishery officer at the village. But the structure of the Ministry of Energy is only at the national level. So even now, to understand how to work with a private sector, this is not easy because they don't work with people directly compared to Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Fishery, as I've said. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. And in that space of Nexus collaboration with ministries, Barbara, considering, I mean, you guys have a lot of experience in, as you said, working and supporting SMEs on the ground, but also I believe EnDev has had experience somehow supporting governments, or at least there's been conversations with governments, particularly Ministry of Energy, I can imagine. Where do you see your role is, or a role of a development partner like yourself, in bringing public and private together and bridging this gap of trust that exists in many countries?
Yes, working, yes. Thank you for that question. And I think the last point is maybe the most important point, and that is trust. So in some countries, you see that there's a really good relationship between the business associations and the political level, both fulfilling their own roles and following political or private sector objectives. And in some countries, yes, sometimes you see that there is a history. I think one of the key success factors is that if you have two parties who might have their history, that you can try to act a bit like an honest broker or like an intermediary in between. In many countries, not only EnDev, but GIZ as a whole has been on the ground with teams for decades. So in many cases, our offices even have been within the Ministry of Energy. There is a very long-term relationship, so people trust us that we understand what they are talking about, and we can bring them together. Of course, it's always difficult if we now amplify not only the business association, but maybe as well the agricultural business association, and not only the Ministry of Energy, but you have as well agriculture, water. In some countries, you have even ministries dedicated to the productive use of energy. That exists as well. So you need to bring them together, and either they have a well-established collaboration or not. And then you need to start the process where the situation is, starting to bring people together, or there is already an established mechanism and you can dive into topics right away. Typically, the Energy Ministry is our partner as we're an energy program. We have some countries where we are as well working directly with other ministries, but then, of course, we first talk to our main political partner, the Energy Ministry. So it's a complex field, but sometimes it's good to have somebody from the outside to mediate through the process and to organize the process of coming together, step by step, coming to a joint conclusion.
Trust building. And also I think, I mean, EnDev being part of the family of the GIZ, can imagine there is this unlocking opportunity to work with your colleagues at GIZ programs, who are also at the same time collaborating with other ministries, no? We were talking about Nexus before and how that can be applicable internally at GIZ. How do you see that happening? Is that already happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of our partners, and I don't know, Matthew, if you remember those times, there were times where indeed GIZ people were basically entering the same door on partner level, one after the other, pretty uncoordinated. But that luckily is really ancient history. We do have very close cooperations, of course, with our GIZ programs on the ground, but as well, and I have a colleague sitting here on the panel with me from our sister program. So this internal integrated thinking within GIZ as well has grown over the past decades. In some cases, this even goes to the level, let's say, in refugee settlements and such humanitarian contexts, that there are clear coordination mechanisms, that not each and every program is entering such a situation, but that there is one main program, for example, working with UNHCR, and we coordinate ourselves behind the scenes. There is only one GIZ coordinating overall, and all the various programs then contribute what they can contribute from their sector perspective. And I think that's as well, if you now look onto the partner side, if you have to deal with a multitude of cooperation partners, that eats up your time. The transaction costs on partner side should never be underestimated. So the easier we can make it for our partners to understand the support landscape, the less people they have to talk to, the more they can do their actual job.
Thanks, Barbara. Divya, coming back to you, let's consider productive uses being boring, okay? Very boring. And building on your presentation before, what do you think is the most, I mean, you were reflecting on a lot of different challenges and opportunities. What is the most urgent thing to mobilize more finance for productive uses?
Does this work? Yeah, it does. Before I go into that, I just wanted to add to what Barbara said. So GET.Invest is one of 3 different programs under a larger program called Get Pro at GIZ. And so like you now know, we work mainly on mobilizing finance for private sector companies out there. But we also have a sister program called Get Transform that then works directly with policy, regulatory environment, and governments. And how this also helps is we bring in the private sector perspective and share it with our colleagues at Get Transform, and then they take that into their conversations with government. So that kind of also is a complementarity out there. Going to your question now, patient equity capital, very important. It's really lacking, I would say, not only for the PUE sector, but it's also quite crucial for the PUE sector. And additionally, having, let's say, local currency loans, but with reduced interest rates, and also with longer tenors. These 2 are more applicable, I would say, to the PUE sector. And I would say these are the most urgent requirements out there, because we did a recent internal study of the different financing we managed to access, so that 49 million euros that you saw on there. And we noticed, and agreeing to what Ulrich was saying here, that we had more than 75% debt in that, in that combined tranche. There was about 19% of grants, including RBFs, but very little equity. So yeah.
Equity being the key. There's a question for you both, Barbara and Divya. The 4th question is, what research gaps are crucial to motivate donors to invest in SMEs in Africa? I don't want to jump on it. Think about it. Ulrich, the first question goes to you, I believe, is because you were talking about 30 or 20 years ago, you guys were testing the energy as a service model, right? So the first question is, in what ways can energy as a service model be adapted to support productive uses in emerging economies and or small industries? And then we will be back to the research question.
Okay. Probably how to start with energy as a service. Yeah, so we did that long time ago, and that was in Latin America. I don't exactly remember the country, but it was really one of the first World Bank projects back then doing this kind of energy as a service, basically where you cut off the system automatically if somebody doesn't pay. And that was one of the first sustainable projects back then, because before, just bringing the system, hoping it would work, didn't turn out to work well. Yeah. Now turning this to the productive use of energy, what I find particularly interesting is, and I think this is something which is completely overlooked so far, is
the actual as a service of the usage of the system, more in a centralized approach with productive use centers, where basically there is center approaches where people go and utilize the service on the village level compared to maybe owning the system itself. I think that's something particularly interesting, which isn't done much so far, but could be a big benefit, because then you basically share the cost of the productive use equipment, and not everybody needs to own the system, right? Because basically maybe you have a 400-liter freezer, but you don't actually need the whole capacity. That's what I see all the time when I'm in the field. Like, sometimes fridges are half empty, or even more than that. Yeah. So if you would share with your neighbor or with two neighbors, you still have more than enough space. So that kind of productive use centers I find particularly interesting for energy as a service, because overall, I think with energy as a service, I think what must be said is the big benefit in the traditional rent-to-own model is the ownership, right? So basically people rent to own the system, which isn't given if you have a pure energy as a service, so you lose the ownership component, which is still an approach which is fine if you have the continuous possibility to maintain the system. So therefore I think there is possibilities for productive use. I think even think a bit more outside the box, think about maybe more productive use centers where you basically can bring different kind of assets together. And why is this so interesting is basically, for example, the traditional distributor today, he would buy, for example, such a kit from us, puts his overhead, sells to somebody in the field. Turn this now with the productive use center, they would maybe even operate it. Yeah, so you might be even able to reduce an additional overhead cost on the system, which is then retained by the actual service. So I think that's something, also a way on how to actually lower the costs by as a service models compared to traditional rent-to-own models.
Thank you, Rich. I've been communicated. We only have 3 more minutes. So going back to Divya and Barbara on the homework of, what is the research pieces that we need? In 10 seconds each, tell us. I've seen you writing a lot of things on a paper, so hopefully it will be condensed in 10 seconds. So tell us 2, 3 more maximum pieces of research that are needed.
Okay, challenge. In terms of technology innovation, I think we need to look into energy efficiency of technologies to make them ready for the off-grid use with solar systems. We see an upcoming discussion again whether fossil fuels are not the best option, even in off-grid. So I think we need to do the math and really have hard data at hand to make the point for renewables. And I think, and please send anything to me that somebody here in the room has, I think we need to work on data to build a track record for people who are concerned not to be credit-worthy, because simply they don't have a tax number, they are not paying taxes, or small businesses in business for 10, 15 years, but nobody acknowledges that in the financial sector. On the private sector side, it's just a big risk, and research might be able to build that bridge.
Thanks, Barbara. Those were the longest 10 seconds in my life. Divya, please.
Yeah, these are not going to be any shorter. But indeed, I think research on the blend of financing that's being dispersed out there to let donors know that there is need for more equity and that that's something that they should be doing something about. And then also, in addition to this, what policies and regulations in which countries have actually been successful at enhancing uptake of PUE. And last but not the least, a bit around the disbursement rates of RBFs, which are usually donor supported, and how they're actually affecting, because disbursement rates of RBFs have been super slow, and this really, really affects the private sector quite a bit.
Thanks, Divya. And believe it or not, and I love it, there is one question, the question on top. After having talked about productive uses for an hour and a half, the top question is, what the hell is productive uses? I love it. I love it because we face that every day in our industry. How do you approach a policymaker and you explain what the hell productive uses is, right? Matthew, 5 seconds. And I hope these are not going to be the longest 5 seconds in my life. How do you, when you do policy advocacy with the public, how do you explain them what productive uses is?
Yeah, actually, it was only sensitization using examples that exist within their community. Then it's very easy people to understand than if you give example of solution they've never come across. So we start with what exists. Sometimes people are sick, but they are not aware that they are sick. So you show them. So this is how I can start, using solutions existing within their community. They don't know, so you explain them. Thank you.
Very practical examples. Thank you. Thanks everyone for the warm applause. I know that the time is over, but I want to hand it back to Kavita, who's been working very tirelessly on the productive use space for 30 years now. And for you to close the session. Thanks a lot, Kavita.
Hi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I had a deja vu moment when Ulrich said, I asked my father, and my father said, don't ask me, we've done this before many times. And I have many young people who come to me and I tell them off saying, don't do it. We've done it. There's loads of material out there, you know. There's nothing new. And I think I agree with what Barbara says. Sometimes boring can be good. And I also would add the word common sense, because often I feel like, you know, there is so much common sense thinking that we have kind of forgotten because we think complex solutions can need to have complex ideas. Not really. Sometimes, you know, just common sense, a logical thinking, getting people together, talking to each other, communication. I think these are very, very important when we have private sector, public sector, you know, all sectors come together. And this is what at IRENA we want to do. I really want to thank you all for staying all the way with us till 3 p.m. There's tea outside. And I really, really want to thank the panel for giving us their time. Ulrich, I think, you know, may your business prosper. May I see lots of scale-ups of your technologies all across the world. We hear very little of productive use, for example, in Latin America, and I was very excited to see that Ulrich and his company is doing work in Latin America, because for us at IRENA, we think whether it's developed or developing countries, we should not, all our members are our members, and we should look across the whole board throughout different geographies. Barbara and Divya, it's great to have, you know, long-standing experiences in productive use. There's a lot we can do, I know, in financing, in delivery models, and I hope all these stories, you know, will come out and you'll write wonderful lessons learned. Matthew, thank you for coming all the way from Tanzania and sharing your experience. Working with the government is always a challenge. As IRENA, we are the secretariat, and I'm sorry that there's no government representative, but I really wanted to bring, you know, the face of the private sector, the face of the people who are working day in and day out on the ground, and bring this to you. I wish we had more time, you know, to engage and interact with you. Do send us your questions. We will, the other questions, the Slido, I will make sure that I have answers to that and put it in our report. Thank you very much. And Carlos, I think it's a great relationship that IRENA and GOGLA has, and I think this will grow stronger every day. And thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. I know there's a drink, I think, at City Hall at 7 p.m. So, yeah, I hope to engage with you, and thank you all. Until the next time. Bye.